I'm doing something different on my own as a continuing student of the School of Hard Knocks. Now, back in the first part of this two-part book review, I have said that I am a cynic and a nihilist, or at least someone who is on my way to recovery. But you see, underneath that cynical and nihilist mindset is a decade's worth of missed opportunities, false starts, and successive failures in my life, vocation, and career. And this is my way of starting from square one. This book, Jordan B. Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. Now, you may be wondering, Ian, does that mean that book could be considered a 12-step program for cynics and nihilists like yourself? That's a good question, but I say not necessarily. I'll get to that by the end of this video. But it is safe to say that there are other literary materials out there that directly tackles cynicism and nihilism, including Dr. Jamil Zaki's new book, Hope for Cynics, which I hope to get as a Christmas gift, or maybe a belated one in 2025. But let me go back to Peterson's book, because after 6 years and 10 million copies sold and counting, this is only the second time I was able to read and finish a major book within the same year. And with many others in the lineup, and some of it is at the back of my at my back right now, I hope this isn't the last. This may perhaps be one of the latest, if not the last, review of this book, given that Peterson just released a new one called We Who Wrestle with God. But I have to first wrestle with his 12 Rules sequel called Beyond Order. But you know what? We'll see. Now, as mentioned in part 1, my fascination with Peterson started when I began thinking about making peace with my past so that I could move forward no matter how late I was into the game. Now, I previously purchased a book called The Man You're Meant to Be by Anthony James Perez, an old friend of mine who is currently based in the United States. Now, in here, which was definitely a quick read, it's just this thick. I recommend you also to get this book as well. Perez explicitly credited Peterson for changing his life for the better now that he is married to the love of his life, who he had to sadly leave behind in Antipolo, and exactly where is none of our business. Needless to say, I thought to myself, if that book propelled him to dare mighty things, I guess it is worth giving it a try. And boy, I thought I would never be able to finish this book due to how prosaic Peterson's writing style is and how emotionally moving it is at times. But you know what? Here we are. But I will be providing my own perspective on my review and reflection later on in this video. So let's start with the book, and let's start with Rule 1. Stand up straight with your shoulders back. Peterson begins his book with a parable of the lobster, where he talks about how alpha males get ahead while vanquished competitors bend their spines in shame. It is sadly the same for people who lose in life, who eventually shut himself off from the cares of the world, saying that it is a dangerous and evil place. However, in order to be a better person, one must accept setbacks and dare try again, even if it is very, very, very hard. And trust me, this is also where I struggle, because doing so signifies to people that you are ready to take up responsibility. With that said though, it is very hard to practice this rule for those who may not have any experience or training in the uniformed services or even scouting. And while I did have some of that in my own personal experience, this rule applies to me first and foremost, as I not only slouch a lot, especially when I'm sitting like right now, but also as someone suspecting myself to be both autistic and ADHD or ADHD for short, I realized that movement is needed to regulate myself, but I also should regulate my movement to not be called a weirdo because excessive movement would definitely label you as a weirdo. I know it sounds counterintuitive and counterproductive because it only means you would have to mask, but there is a certain way of, or a healthy way of, interacting with people or masking. Because let's face it, at this point in time, a lot of people may have an idea about neurodiversity, but never, you know, never have any way of accepting or understanding it from the outside looking in. But that's a very uh different tangent we're going. So we wrap up rule 1 by saying that either way, the parable of the lobster is worth learning from, not just an enjoyable seafood dinner. You're not a lobster, you're a top lobster if you stand up straight. You need to do it in order to progress to rule 2. Treat yourself like someone you are responsible for helping. It is important to think about others and why they should be helped. But it is also true that we cannot give what we do not have. And I realized this was the theme for this rule. As you all know, in the beginning there is order and chaos, but they have not yet interacted. Order is God the Father, Peterson wrote. Chaos is mater, origin, source, mother. And in the Judeo-Christian creation story, the interaction began with God's first words. Fiat lux, let there be light. This dichotomy of male order and female chaos do not contradict each other. Okay? They do not contradict each other, but has been in harmony through a mediation process called consciousness. Consciousness means there is a degree of both order and chaos in one's mind, and it is important for the student of the School of Hard Knocks to know the chaos within to put things at order's feet. For men specifically like me, it is important for us men to become the order feminine chaos wants to balance herself with. In short, this rule calls us to get our collective shit together and know and learn that we need to take care of ourselves as much as we do for others. Because as mentioned, we cannot give what we do not have. Rule 2 not only applies to myself, but also to one of the reasons why I started my YouTube stint in the very first place, and that guy is Nico David. He is a very intelligent guy, and I certainly wish him the very best, but his online personality unfortunately makes him a simp. So that's why I would like to bluntly tell him to keep discerning as much as he does for the content he is spewing out, because as we continue to rule 3, make friends with people who want the best for you, I must praise his good stuff and criticize his bad takes. Peterson begins rule 3 with telling the story of his childhood at a small town in the Canadian province of Alberta and the unfortunate downward spiral of his friends' lives. People at the metaphorical bottom normally make friends either as a way to commiserate and improve together, or for one of them to have some sort of savior complex over the other. According to Peterson, there is no shortage of oppressors among the downtrodden, even if, given their lowly positions, many of them are only tyrannical wannabes. And I have a confession to make. I did not have very close friends until recently. Whatever parasociality I was into in the past was due to me being at the bottom of the food chain, and those who supposedly wanted to become friends with me are actually just work colleagues telling me to get my shit together. While I certainly appreciate those, the warmth of sticking together because of a common fate eluded me. In short, Rule 3 stipulates that the student of Hard Knocks should surround himself with people who would positively influence him and make him a good person, even if it means they may call him out for his wrongdoings. If possible, we should make friends with those who share similar good beliefs and perspectives as ours. Either way, we must find people who will both commend us for our good actions and be brutal or blunt for our bad shit. The dialogue of life requires people to deal with the cards that they have, and this rule is something AJ Perez realized in his book called The Man You're Meant to Be. This one, again, I would definitely recommend you read this after reading this, or the other way around. It doesn't matter. I read this first before Peterson. Either way, it is a good combo. But in applying rule 3, there's a catch, and that's rule 4. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else today. And this is a particularly hard saying for me. You see, my parents come from relatively poor backgrounds, which meant they have been expecting me and my siblings to become better than them, and rightfully so. However, with these chips on their shoulders, they cannot help but compare from the people surrounding us. Relatives, friends, neighbors, even people in church. This only means one thing. I became resentful that I seem to be stagnating when my peers and colleagues are getting ahead. Rule 4 is difficult to understand, particularly for those who live in stereotypically Asian backgrounds, have relatives who are more successful, or have parents who have high expectations for their children, which we will elaborate more in Rule 5. However, this rule is important since we all have an inner child, and our inner children may have been wounded profoundly in the past. Rule 4 is supposed to heal the inner child and convince people pleasers like licensed marriage and family therapist Katie Morton that they have the right to win in life in their own terms as long as it benefits the common good. It is also important for students of hard knocks to pay attention and reflect on one's past to improve oneself, and perhaps more importantly, give himself a pat on the back. In short, we should enjoy small wins and work on them to get to bigger wins without our parents making us feel guilty about it. Which brings us to Rule 5. Do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. Now, this is actually tied to Rule 4, given that, at least in my case, Rule 5 also tackles the relationship between parents and children. And according to Peterson, there are 5 rules in properly disciplining children. And the operating word here is properly, as discipline is necessary for children to become well-rounded persons and not as spoiled brats. 1. Limit the rules. 2. Use minimum necessary force. 3. Parents should come in pairs. 4. Parents should understand their own capacity to harmful emotions. And 5. Parents have the duty to act as proxies for the real world. And just to get off script, I actually have notes regarding this book review, and pardon my penmanship. That's just my personal style, so that's that. And these emotions are actually the following: being harsh, being vengeful, being arrogant, being resentful, being angry, and being deceitful. Basically, these are the emotions that parents have to understand so that they would not do that to their own children. This kind of parenting should be relaxed, or balanced rather, not too gentle, not too strict. And as for single parents who have children of the opposite sex, it is their responsibility to find a father or mother figure to look up to as a mentor, although it is not necessary that he or she would marry or cohabitate with that person. In short, if people had a bad childhood, it is his or her duty as a parent to not, I repeat, not pass that on to their own children, and that the buck stops with me. This rule reminds me of my own cousin whose dad, basically my uncle, and my father's brother is an asshole who left his wife and son out of spite. I don't know the whole damn story, but let's just say that, the whole family disapproves that. Luckily, his mother's side, my aunt's own family, has male mentors who formed my cousin of mine to become the good man he is right now. So, you know who you are. Shout out to you. Obviously, this rule is a tip for parents out there. Not just your parents, my parents, and everyone else. Now, it also applies to people in authority, in loco parentis or otherwise, as well as religious clerics. But you know what? I'll leave it at that because of Rule 6. Set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. The reason why I cut short my criticism about clerics is because there is a possibility of a delusionary notion that they must all die because I was wronged by them ever since I was a university student, and they have also wronged many well-meaning lay people, some of which I personally know. Another reason why I cut this short, or I cut short my criticism, is the 6th rule that Peterson implemented, because it appears to be the simplest and most self-explanatory of them all. And it could be summarized as this: clean your fucking room. Things fall apart. I know. It does happen to me. But there is no use to point the blame on anyone or anything except yourself, even if the other is at fault. On the other hand, there is even the possibility that you might be the one in the wrong and the fault was your own. Either way, it is best to have some humility. Also, start small by cleaning yourself and your room, and at least learn to master over things you can control before trying to tackle things you can't. This is the importance of not just humility, but also self-realization. This rule, in principle, is similar to the whole premise of this book, Atomic Habits by James Clear, which I am currently reading alongside my copy of the Confessions of St. Augustine. So, you know what's the next, one of the next books that I'm going to review, okay? That's that. So, to put the rule in a different wording, I can say it's this: try cleaning yourself and your room before cleaning society's filth. Rule 6 applies to everyone, especially if you have your own room. Now, I technically do not have one because in the setting that we have here in Intrepid HQ, it's just different. But I still try my best to adhere to it, especially to this workstation. I know it's a bit messy, but that works. That's basically my, that's basically my order. Point of performance and all that shit. It's all sorted, but of course I can tweak at any time. Okay? So that's that. As I said, Rule 6 applies to everyone, and the most important online personality who needs this rule more than anyone else is Asmongold. For obvious sanitary reasons. I understand that, he has been notorious to the online community for how messy his room is, that cockroaches have been infesting his area where he is streaming. So, I understand he is already trying to clean his room, but he needs to make it a habit. Okay, so Asmon, no disrespect to you, but yeah, You really need to make your room cleaner as it is. Okay? Than it is right now. Now, this rule is also important to avoid hikikomoris, shut-ins, from being mass shooters. Which brings us to Rule 7. Pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. Have you ever thought to yourself what the meaning of life is with all the bad shit that is happening around us that causes suffering? If your answer is, I don't know, let me tell you, I don't either. But there is a difference in acting to find meaning and in acting to get things done. The latter is the bare minimum, and an excess of that will lead to evil, while practicing the former would eventually lead you into the path of goodness. According to Peterson, pursuing expedience does not eliminate suffering, but ironically allows it to fester. On the other hand, meaning gives us hope and transcends suffering. And in thinking about the pursuit of meaning, we must favor the perspective of Descartes about it more, which is cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, and not Nietzsche's, who said Gott ist tot, God is dead. So Descartes over Nietzsche. That's what Peterson said in that book. For this rule, journalists, commentators, and other media personalities come to mind when thinking about to whom this rule applies. Another rule they have to take note of, which I understand they should master by now, is Rule 8. Tell the truth, or at least do not lie. You see, lies give way to manipulation. Manipulation leads to totalitarianism. Totalitarianism brings chaos. At this point, I'm seeing patterns in Peterson's argumentative style of writing, where he provided examples from the not so distant past about regimes that lied to its people in order to control them as a compensation for their weaknesses, whatever it may be, which Peterson discussed in detail in Rule 11, so stick around for that. On the other hand, truth leads to goodness. Goodness leads to meaning, and meaning brings order. Like as it was mentioned in Rule 7, the pursuit of truth is closely tied to the pursuit of meaning, which practically makes expedience a vice that needs to be eliminated. And for Christians, Jesus is the Word made flesh, and he is also the truth that liberates, for thus it is written, the truth shall set you free. This is an obvious rule of thumb for everyone, but unfortunately, debate bros like Vosh, Destiny, and Hassan Piker might find this rule disturbing. Just like Rule 9. Assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't. This rule is also hard to swallow, especially if the person you're talking to is incompetent, manipulative, and assertive. While assertion has its place, it should not be in an honest conversation. Also, listening is a hard practice as it requires patience and understanding. And tons of both, because authentic listening requires true reciprocity between both or all parties. In short, we should preliminarily suspend judgment on and avoid prejudice of others in order to properly discern if they are telling the truth or lying to their teeth. In short, we should preliminarily suspend judgment on and avoid prejudice of others in order to properly discern if they are telling the truth or lying to their teeth. In contemporary parlance, let him cook and see if he would be sautéed in his own lard. And yes, I use the Tagalog idiom, ginisa sa sariling mantika. So that's that. Basically, this rule is the summary of the Dunning-Kruger effect, or at least that's my understanding of it. And debate bros and ideologues should be aware of the side effects of prejudice. But then again, you know, I'm not taking my chances, or I'm not holding out hope for the ones that I've mentioned earlier in Rule 8, but you know what? Screw it. I'm still I'm still hoping out that they would understand it in due course. In time, once we have enough information about what the other is saying, we can apply Rule 10. Be precise in your speech. Being in a tumultuous situation, whatever it might be, can be tough, and it could weigh us down to the point of not being able to speak. Trust me, I experienced that too. But while Peterson wrote the explanation to this rule in the context and scenario of a non-communicating married couple, the underlying message calls the reader to know precisely where he or she is in order to move forward. As mentioned in Rule 8, we are supposed to tell the truth at all time, and sometimes that truth is painful to say and hard to swallow, yet we are obliged to say the truth anyway. Why? Because addressing demons and dragons from the get-go avoid them from festering and tormenting the person dealing with them. Basically, we are trying to nip it in the bud. I also remembered Peterson's recent interview with British broadcaster Piers Morgan when he tearfully remembered his recently deceased father, Walter, may he rest in peace. Peterson recalled that his dad was a collector of firearms, which he described as single-shot rifles, which could have influenced him to be accurate in his speech and nail it in one go. Being precise and specific in speech would bring order and put chaos in her proper place, as Rule 2 stresses the ideal harmony between the two. With that said, this is the proper context in becoming assertive, especially for those who seek to have a fucking spine in these trying times when people disregard the principles of Rule 11. Do not bother children when they are skateboarding. In short, kids are kids and let kids be kids. Sadly, this is not what society is thinking at this point. As mentioned in Rules 4 and 5, parents tend to parent too close to the sun, where boys are being strictly monitored and girls are pampered and spoiled so much that they seem to have forgotten what good and proper parenting is. As a result, boys are falling by the wayside of society and are stuck with things that would, to put it mildly, give bad connotations to gamers and genuine people who seek to help each other online, if it doesn't already do so. Today's mindset distorts the notion of fun for boys that they are left confused as they grow old. It also stunts them so much that they are willing to let go of their own career options to catch up with what they missed during their childhood and teenage years. But it's important to note here, ladies and gentlemen, that as long as you are a responsible man, a loving husband, and a good father, being involved in video games and other hobbies should remain an option to divert one's attention from the harsh realities of life, even for just a few hours a day. And that's where the spawns of the third and perhaps even the fourth wave of feminism attack boys and young men to the point that they would either succumb to defeat or join their ranks, which, frankly, they do not belong to, both figuratively and literally. You see, according to Peterson, good women love manly men, and bad women like boy toys. And bad women use compassion as a vice, which in turn leads to resentment on the part of the boy or young man. And we go again with the patterns. Resentment breeds ideology. Ideology makes weak men. Weak men become anti-human, and the notion of anti-humanity brings more resentment, and the cycle continues. When resentment breeds ideology, weak men compensate for their vulnerability by projecting themselves to have the moral high ground, by fabricating lies as its pedestal, as mentioned earlier in Rule 8. Now, these ideologies influence intellectual thought and poison the educational well that, after a few decades of normalization, alienates men by promoting women. Let me share an anecdote, okay? When I attended university in the early 2010s, the class section I was in was composed of roughly 50 people, 50. Around 40 of them are girls, and the rest, including myself, are boys, and I am not sure if all of them are into girls. Statistically, my section was 80% young women, and very beautiful and attractive ones like that. No questions asked. No question about it. However, I can only speak from my own experience in the program I studied in, because there are still programs that remain either male-dominated or balanced. Needless to say, on a global scale, male attendance in tertiary education has been dwindling ever since, and the college boys who remain either persevere to preserve their masculinity or become weak men, or worse, women, if you know what I mean. Peterson then cleared the accusations about the patriarchy being the main menace in today's society, when in fact, it was the patriarchy who helped women to be who they are right now.
Talk about ingratitude there, ladies.
The patriarchy, he pointed out, is more helpful than what the woke crowd perceive it to be in their prejudice. And you know where we talked about prejudice? Yes, Rule 9. This rule reminds us all to allow boys to toughen up as good men, lest they become soy boys! With all due respect to PewDiePie, by the way. So that's that. So Nick Fuentes and Asmongold, listen up, because Hassan Piker and his ilk won't. Take some time off and assess your manhood and your identity, and you can start with Rule 1. We wouldn't mind your absence on the internet, and we hope you'll come out of this as better men. And Asmon, please take note of Rule 6, okay? Oh, and finally, Rule 12. Pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. Dogs count too, don't worry. Now, all across the book, Peterson highlighted the importance of being with a capital B, which he got from the German philosopher Martin Heidegger. Heidegger thought of being as the fundamental nature of existence, not necessarily a deity like the Judeo-Christian God, but as Peterson defined it, the totality of human existence. In Rule 2, Peterson highlighted that man possesses a spark of the divine, where he has control over order and chaos. What this means is that man has the ability to direct or redirect himself to what he thinks is good despite setbacks, or perhaps because of it, as Rule 1 stipulates. This is an important context for this final rule, because let's face it, life sucks and shit happens. But if being is connotated to the divine, being requires becoming. And if we are to imitate being, and if I may contribute my small and insignificant understanding of this concept, being requires becoming through bestowing. In Christian theology, the one Godhead of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit is a self-contained community of caritas, or charity, the highest and most perfect act of love. In the same vein, people of all beliefs, and even none, are called to not only develop an attitude of humility, which is stipulated in Rule 6, and pursue at least a meaning for all your actions, a reference to Rule 7, but also to equally make an impact to the people that we love, especially referring to Rules 3, 4, and 5, and those we don't, which is basically the rest of the rules from Rules 8 to 11. And now, here in Rule 12, Peterson implied that thinking is not only the thing that is necessary to live a good life, because thinking may not be enough for the men of this age when in dire straits. Noticing might help one's understanding of being, all of its joys and hopes and all of its griefs and anxieties, as mentioned in the Second Vatican Council document Gaudium et Spes. With that said, Peterson reminds us, whether we are pet lovers or not, to step back, appreciate the good that you have, and observe, and take every day as it is. For this life is a struggle. And if this life is a struggle, it is a war, not a single battle. And we must win the war if it means taking some losses in particular battles. And in a majority, and win in the majority of them. But we need to take some losses in particular battles, including the final one, where death is the enemy. Until then, pet a cat or a dog when you find one along the way. After months of reading through 12 Rules for Life, I was deeply moved by how Peterson intended to share his insights about living life amidst the chaos of the modern world. I then realized that the legendary YouTuber Felix PewDiePie Kjellberg made a book review of 12 Rules for Life when it was newly published 6 years ago. With the life he has right now, that is becoming a good husband to Marcia and a good father to Björn in Japan, and the fact that he still has detractors because of his ethos of self-improvement, the bridge incident, and more importantly, his family's alleged deep pockets back in Sweden. That last one is a non sequitur, by the way, but it's a woke nitpick. I can only say that Peterson had an impact on PewDiePie's life. And if this book helped out the greatest YouTuber that ever lived, it could at least be useful to lesser men and women like me and you if we seriously take these dozen rules to heart. For starters, here's my theory on how to understand Peterson's 12 rules. From where I see it, the first half, rules 1 to 6, correspond to those of the second, rules 7 to 12. So, for example, rule 1 corresponds to rule 7, and rule 2 to rule 8, and so on and so forth. Also, at the beginning of this review, I said there is a possibility that 12 Rules for Life could be considered a 12-step program for cynics and nihilists, but I am not sure if it could make some concrete correspondence for every rule or even some sense. For all I know, I said it to humor myself and explaining it could be an unnecessary stretch. But you know what? The gloves are off. Here goes nothing. So if I combine the 12-step program to the 12 rules for life, this is the following 12 steps for cynics and nihilists. 1, we admit we are powerless over chaos, cynicism, and nihilism, so we stand straight to accept the responsibilities and consequences. 2, we believe being could restore us through order, so we treat ourselves as someone responsible for helping. 3, we decide to bring order and chaos in its places to the will of being and make friends with those who want the best in us. 4, we commit to make a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves by comparing ourselves only to our own past and not to anyone else's present state. 5, we admit to being to ourselves and to others the exact nature of our wrongs and not let our children do anything that would dislike us. 6, we are entirely ready to have being remove all defects of our character by setting our house in perfect order first. 7, we humbly seek to correct our shortcomings by pursuing what is meaningful. 8, we intend to identify the people we have harmed and make amends to them by telling the truth. 9, we commit to make direct amends to the people we have hurt as much as possible and listen to their side of the story without prejudice. 10, we seek to continue to take personal inventory and admit our wrongdoings in a precise manner. 11, we seek through any good means to improve our conscious contact with being by allowing the natural process of growth and learning to run its course. And 12, having had an awakening as a result of each of such steps and rules, we seek to live a full life by sharing our experiences and taking every day as it is. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please leave in the comments your take whether or not these articles make some sense. But at least I gave it a try. Shoot your shot, by the way. So that's that. And finally, if I could condense all these rules by Jordan Peterson into several principles based on my theory and considering as well the book's epilogue, which I call the Pen of Light Manifesto, it could be summarized as follows. Stand tall and do what is meaningful. Know thyself and tell the truth. Befriend good people and listen to everyone else. Pay attention and shoot straight. Let kids be kids. You became one yourself. Go outside and touch some grass. Because chaos brings suffering, but order gives hope that transcends suffering. So do what is right and do what you can today, even if it means beginning with yourself. And that's the bottom line, because Jordan B. Peterson said so.